All right, my darlings, quick video here to help you with lesson 3.04 viruses. Lesson 3.04 covers prokaryotes as well. So we're just going to talk about viruses in this video, and it's lesson 304, pages 2 through 4 only. So make sure you focus on those pages 2 through 4. So this video should help you with the reading of the lesson and also the CRQ that goes with viruses. So have you ever had chickenpox or the flu or the common cold? Each of these illnesses and many others is caused by a virus. Viruses are non-living particles that reproduce by invading and using the mechanisms of a host cell. They are made up of a protein coat surrounding a segment of either DNA or RNA. As we learn about classifying living organisms here in Unit 3, you'll notice that viruses are not included in this hierarchy of taxonomic classification. The reason that viruses do not fall in any of these classifications is because viruses are not considered to be living organisms. They are not alive. Scientists consider viruses to be non-living particles because 1, they're not cells. 2, they don't take in energy from the environment. In other words, they don't eat or photosynthesize. 3, they don't grow. And 4, they don't have a metabolism. They do, however, reproduce, but they can't do it alone. A virus injects its DNA and RNA into the cells of living organisms, and then the living cell makes many new copies of the virus. And yes, this creepy looking picture right here is a virus. So viruses reproduce inside the cells of living organisms. So they reproduce inside live cells. Viruses cannot manufacture their own proteins, so they must rely on the living cell of another organism to reproduce. Viruses reproduce in one of 2 different ways. A virus can reproduce by going through what we call the lytic cycle or the lysogenic cycle. The virus particle that we're going to use as an example for the lytic and lysogenic cycles is called a T4 bacteriophage. It's a virus that infects bacterial cells. So yes, bacterial cells can actually be infected with a virus. So in the lytic cycle, a virus infects and ultimately kills a living cell by injecting its DNA or RNA into the cell. The cell's DNA replication machinery, like enzymes and other proteins, replicate the viral genes and produce the proteins required to make the capsid, which is the protein coat of the virus. The viral DNA tells the living cell to assemble new viral particles. In other words, the viral DNA takes over the living cell and directs the living cell to assemble particles to make up new viruses. Ultimately, the cell bursts open, which kills the cell, and it releases the new viruses that it assembled. And then the new viruses can go on and infect new cells. So we're going to take a look at lesson 304, page 3. There is an animation there of the lytic cycle. So once again, this is lesson 304. I'm on page 3, and this animation will take us through a virus or a bacteriophage going through the lytic cycle to reproduce. So you can see here, if I click play, first the virus attaches to the cell. So this is the cell, right? This is the virus. And then the virus injects nucleic acid, so some, nuclear genetic material into the host cell. And the host cell processes the viral nucleic acid as its own DNA. So the virus tricks the host cell into thinking that this is its own DNA, when really it's DNA from the virus. And then the host cell forms new virus parts, including proteins and viral nucleic acids. So the virus tricked the cell into making new virus parts. And then it directs the cell to assemble new complete viruses. And then finally, the new viruses burst out of the host cell, which of course kills the host cell in the process. So in some viruses, reproduction also involves the lysogenic cycle. In the lysogenic cycle, a virus injects its DNA into a cell, and the DNA becomes a part of that cell's genome. When the host cell replicates its DNA and divides, it also replicates the viral DNA. The viral DNA will be found in all new cells being created. Depending on the virus, the viral DNA may not become active for many years. It's almost as if the viral DNA is asleep. Eventually, when the conditions are right, the viral DNA in the genome is turned on. The cell switches over to the lytic cycle and starts building viruses. Eventually, the cell bursts and dies, and the virus particles float away. As scientists work to develop vaccines, new resistant viral strains develop as viral DNA mutates. So we're going to go to lesson 304, page 4, where we're going to take a look at an animation of the lysogenic cycle. So here is the animation of the lysogenic cycle. Unfortunately, I have to kind of scroll up and down here to show this, but first, the virus, of course, again attaches to the cell. And then the viral nucleic acid is injected into the host cell. And then you can see we have inside this bacterial cell, we have the bacteria's chromosome, and then the virus injected its own DNA into the bacterial cell. And each time the host cell reproduces, it also replicates a piece of viral DNA, and that viral DNA might not become active for a long period of time. And then, eventually, when conditions are right, the viral DNA becomes active, and then each cell goes back into the lytic cycle and produces new viruses. And I've got here some examples of viruses. This is just 3 examples. There are more viruses than we can count, but here's 3 examples. On the left, different strains of coronavirus are linked to common colds, intestinal illnesses, and of course COVID-19. In the middle, the T4 bacteriophage virus attacks bacteria commonly found in the human digestive tract. And all the way to the right, the red dots represent HIV particles bursting out of a cell. When HIV bursts out of a cell, the cell is destroyed. Viruses often only infect a particular cell in a specific species. HIV targets the cells of the human immune system, and a person with HIV eventually develops AIDS, and that is called acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, and someone with AIDS has a weakened immune system. So in review, and to help with your CRQ coming up, viruses are non-living particles that reproduce by invading and using the mechanisms of a host cell. Viruses are not included in the hierarchy of taxonomic classification because they're not alive. They're considered non-living particles because 1, they're not cells, 2, they don't take in energy from the environment. In other words, they don't photosynthesize or eat anything. They don't grow, and they don't have a metabolism. However, they do reproduce through the lytic cycle and the lysogenic cycle, and of course, a few examples include HIV, coronaviruses, and bacteriophages.